Close your eyes for the moment and imagine the slow warmth of dawn rising over the hills of Judea. The air is cool and still. A faint breeze drifts across dry grasses and scattered olive trees as the first pale light begins to stretch across the horizon. You stand on a dusty road worn smooth by countless travellers. Beneath your sandals, the earth feels firm and powdery, packed down by centuries of footsteps, hooves, carts, and pilgrim caravans. Ahead of you, resting upon a ridge of pale limestone, the city slowly emerges from the darkness. Jerusalem. 2,000 years ago, the city does not glitter with glass or metal. Instead, it glows softly in the early light. Its buildings are carved from the same cream-coloured stone as the hills around it, so that the city seems almost to grow naturally from the landscape itself. The walls come into view first. They stretch along the ridge like the spine of a great sleeping creature. Towers rise at intervals along the fortification square and watchful against the brightening sky. At this early hour, only a few small shapes move along the ramparts. Guards finishing their night watch lean on spears while the city behind them slowly wakes. For a moment you simply stand and observe. A faint sound carries across the valley. Perhaps a donkey brays somewhere outside the walls. Farther away you hear the creak of a wooden cart axle as another traveller begins the climb toward the city gates. The smell of dry earth mixes with something softer drifting on the breeze. Smoke from cooking fires. Someone inside the city has already begun preparing the morning meal. Your journey along this road has likely taken many days. Pilgrims come from villages scattered across the hills of Galilee. Merchants travel from the coastal plains. Some visitors arrive from astonishing distances across the Roman Empire, Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria, even Rome itself. All of them eventually reach this same road. As the sunlight strengthens, the city reveals more of its shape. The ridge forms a narrow spine of land running roughly north to south. Valleys fall away sharply on either side. To the east lies the Kidron Valley, where morning shadows still cling to the slopes. To the west spreads another shallow valley where terraced fields and small gardens climb toward the walls. The city is not enormous by modern standards. In fact, compared to great Roman capitals, Jerusalem is modest in size. Yet something about it commands attention. Perhaps it is the way the temple rises above everything else. Even from this distance, the enormous platform of the Temple Mount catches the earliest sunlight. The upper structures glow faintly gold as the rays strike polished stone and metal decoration. Your eyes are drawn to it almost immediately. It is impossible to ignore. Long before archaeologists began studying these hills, ancient writers described the same impression. One Roman historian once wrote that the temple seemed to dominate the skyline like a mountain placed upon a mountain. Modern archaeological studies from institutions such as Oxford and Stanford have confirmed much of what those ancient observers described. Excavations around the Temple Mount have revealed enormous foundation stones, some weighing hundreds of tons, carefully fitted together without mortar. Even now, thousands of years later, those stones still hold the platform steady. Yet as you stand on the road, history is not your first thought. Instead, you notice the living city slowly awakening. A small group of travellers approaches from behind you along the road. Their cloaks are dusty from travel. One man leads a donkey carrying bundles tied with rope. Another holds a walking staff polished smooth from long use. They nod briefly as they pass. Pilgrims recognise one another easily here. Perhaps you fall into step behind them for a while, walking together toward the gate. No formal greeting is necessary. The shared destination is enough. The road begins to climb. Loose stones shift slightly beneath your feet as you move uphill. Along the edges of the path grow thorny shrubs and wild herbs that release a faint scent when brushed by passing robes. Oddly enough, ancient pollen studies from sediment layers around Jerusalem suggest that herbs such as thyme sage and wild mint grew widely across these hills 2,000 years ago. That means the faint fragrance drifting through the air this morning is not just imagination. It is a scent travellers in the first century would genuinely have known. The sun now rises fully above the eastern horizon. Light spills into the Kidron Valley and begins climbing the city walls. The limestone block shift from pale grey to warm honey tones. The towers seem brighter and sharper against the sky. Down-ish to the sky. You can now make out the gate toward which the road leads. A broad opening breaks the line of the wall. Heavy wooden doors stand open at this early hour. Above the gate rises a tower where guards observe those entering and leaving. Movement gathers there. Farmers from nearby villages arrive carrying baskets of vegetables or jars of oil to sell in the markets. Shepherds guide small flocks of sheep toward the city. Traders from distant provinces lead camels loaded with cloth spices and metal tools. The road becomes busier as everyone converges on the same entrance. One curious detail noted by several historians is that Jerusalem's population fluctuated dramatically throughout the year. In ordinary months, the city might hold perhaps 40 or 50,000 people. Yet during major religious festivals, the number of visitors could multiply several times over. Some scholars even argue the population may have temporarily swelled to several 100,000 during the largest celebrations. Not everyone agrees with those estimates. Arguments among historians continue about the exact numbers. Archaeological layers provide clues, but the true scale of the crowds remains an open question. Still, even on an ordinary morning like this one, the gate is lively. As you draw closer, the sounds grow clearer. Voices speaking in different accents, the shuffle of sandals across stone, the low murmur of animals being coaxed forward through the narrow entrance. Above all of it rises the quiet hum of anticipation, because Jerusalem is not simply another city. It's a place where faith, politics, trade, memory and hope all gather together in one narrow ridge of stone. Your steps slow slightly as you approach the threshold. The shadow of the gate tower stretches across the road ahead. For a brief moment, the sunlight disappears as you pass beneath the heavy wooden beams overhead. Then the city opens before you, and the world inside Jerusalem begins. The cool shadow of the gateway lingers around you for a moment as your eyes adjust to the change in light. Behind you lies the dusty road and the open hills of Judea. Ahead stretches the living interior of Jerusalem. The threshold between the two worlds is narrow, yet the shift feels unmistakable. Outside the walls, the land spreads wide and quiet. Inside the city gathers people, sounds and movement into a tighter rhythm. You step forward slowly beneath the massive wooden doors. Their surfaces are thick with iron studs hammered into the planks centuries ago. When your hand brushes the wood, you feel the rough grain beneath your fingers worn smooth in places by thousands of passing travellers. The doors are open now, but their weight suggests how firmly they can seal the city when danger threatens. Above your head rises the gate tower. Its limestone blocks are large and precisely cut. Some bear faint chisel marks still visible along the edges, where ancient masons shaped the stone. Modern archaeological surveys conducted by researchers connected with institutions such as Yale and Oxford confirm that many of Jerusalem's gate structures were rebuilt or reinforced during the reign of King Herod the Great in the late 1st century before the Common Era. The techniques used in those constructions allowed walls to endure immense pressure, while still presenting a grand facade to anyone approaching the city. As you pass fully through the gate, the noise of the morning grows stronger. A line of farmers waits beside the entrance while city officials examine baskets and jars. Taxes must be recorded. Goods must be declared. A Roman-backed administration oversees such matters carefully because commerce flowing through Jerusalem generates significant revenue. One elderly man lifts the cloth covering his basket to reveal clusters of figs still dusted with the pale bloom of freshness. A young official nods and marks something on a small wax tablet. Nearby, 2 Roman soldiers stand watch. Their armour catches the sunlight in brief flashes of bronze. Leather straps creak softly when they shift their stance. Though they say little, their presence carries weight. The Roman Empire governs this region, and the soldiers stationed at the gates quietly remind everyone of that fact. Curiously enough, archaeological discoveries suggest that Roman military presence within Jerusalem itself was sometimes smaller than people imagine. Excavations and historical records indicate that the main Roman garrison usually stayed at the Antonia fortress near the temple complex, rather than occupying every corner of the city. Still, soldiers at strategic locations such as gates ensured that order remained visible. The crowd moves steadily inward. A donkey passes beside you, its hooves clopping gently against the stone paving. The animal carries 2 clay jars tied carefully with rope. The smell of olive oil drifts faintly from their lids. You follow the flow of people deeper into the gate passage. The tunnel through the wall is thicker than you expected. Stone surrounds you on both sides, cool and dim. Narrow slits cut into the walls allow guards above to observe the entryway below. Light filters through those openings in thin beams that illuminate drifting dust. Your footsteps echo slightly. When the passage opens again on the inner side of the wall, the city reveals its next layer. Just inside the gate lies a small open area where several streets begin to branch outward like the veins of a leaf. Carts stand waiting while animals drink from a shallow trough. Traders adjust bundles of cloth or pottery before heading toward the markets farther uphill. The smell here is complex. Fresh bread from a nearby bakery, damp straw beneath the animals, smoke from cooking fires that have already been burning since before dawn. For a moment you pause and look back at the gate from inside. The architecture reveals something interesting. The entrance is not simply a straight opening through the wall. Instead, the path bends slightly, forcing travellers to change direction as they pass through. Military engineers often designed gates this way. The angled approach slows invading forces and allows defenders above to observe and control movement more effectively. Records preserved by historians indicate that several such defensive designs existed throughout ancient Jerusalem. Yet despite the strategic planning behind these structures, the atmosphere this morning is not tense. It is lively and practical. The gate functions as the city's lungs, breathing people in and out throughout the day. A curious footnote from ancient sources describes how some gate areas also served as informal meeting places. Merchants waited here to greet arriving caravans. Messengers paused to exchange news before continuing their journeys. Occasionally, religious teachers or storytellers addressed small crowds gathered near the entrances. You can almost imagine those conversations unfolding here. Perhaps someone discusses the price of grain in distant cities. Another traveller shares rumours from the coast. A pilgrim asks directions to the temple courts. Just beyond the open space, a street climbs upward between tall stone buildings. From where you stand, you can see only part of it. The road curves slightly, disappearing between houses whose upper levels lean toward each other across the narrow lane. Laundry hangs from ropes strung between windows. Clay jars rest along doorways waiting to be filled at public water sources. The city is already awake. Footsteps echo along the street. Somewhere farther uphill, a metal hammer strikes rhythmically against iron, suggesting a blacksmith beginning his workday. Historians often remark that Jerusalem's streets were far narrower than those of large Roman cities, such as Caesarea or Antioch. Excavations conducted by archaeological teams have revealed winding lanes, sometimes barely wide enough for 2 loaded animals to pass each other comfortably. These tight spaces created an atmosphere very different from the grand avenues of Roman urban planning. Yet the narrow streets also produce something unique. Life unfolded close together. Voices carried easily from one house to another. Cooking scents drifted across entire neighborhoods. News traveled quickly because people encountered one another constantly in these confined passages. Even now you begin to feel that closeness. A group of children runs past you, chasing one another along the street. Their sandals slap against the stones. A woman calls after them from a doorway, reminding them to stay near the house until chores are finished. Meanwhile, the steady stream of new arrivals continues pouring through the gate behind you. Some visitors glance upward as if orienting themselves for the first time. Others move confidently through the streets, clearly familiar with the city's layout. Scholars still argue about the exact configuration of every gate and street in ancient Jerusalem. Layers of destruction and rebuilding across centuries have complicated the archaeological picture. Yet enough foundations remain for researchers to reconstruct much of the city's general shape. What emerges from those studies is a portrait of a bustling, layered place where sacred spaces, homes, workshops, markets, and government structures all intertwined within a surprisingly compact area. You turn again towards the rising street. The deeper city awaits. The gate behind you continues its steady rhythm of arrivals. while ahead the maze of Jerusalem begins drawing you inward step by step into the life of a place that has already carried thousands of years of memory, and the morning has only just begun. The street rising from the gate pulls you upward almost immediately. Jerusalem is a city built on slopes. Very few paths remain level for long. Instead, the streets climb dip, twist, and angle around the natural shape of the ridge. Each step carries you slightly higher above the valley behind you. The stones beneath your sandals feel worn and uneven. Some are smooth from generations of footsteps. Others show the faint chisel marks of the masons who set them into place long ago. A cartwheel rattles over the surface nearby, producing a hollow rhythm that echoes between the walls. The lane itself is narrow. Two loaded donkeys pass each other carefully, while their handlers guide them with soft clicks of the tongue. Their flanks brush against doorways and baskets hanging from wooden hooks. You instinctively step aside to give them space. Above you, the upper levels of houses lean inward over the street. Balconies made from wooden beams extend slightly beyond the walls. Clay jars sit on ledges where families store water or olives. From one window, a length of cloth flutters gently in the fussy morning breeze. The city feels alive at close range. You hear the murmur of voices drifting from open doorways. Someone laughs somewhere behind a wall. A clay pot clinks softly as it is placed on a stone surface. A baker pulls a tray of flat bread from a small oven near the street corner. The smell is warm and comforting. The bread is round and thin, still steaming slightly as he stacks it in a basket lined with cloth. Bread like this forms the centre of daily meals across Judea. Archaeological studies of ancient cooking installations discovered throughout Jerusalem reveal ovens built directly into courtyards or small workshops. These ovens, often shaped like large clay jars set into stone bases, allowed families or neighbourhood bakers to prepare dozens of flat loaves each morning. Modern research conducted by specialists working with institutions such as Stanford and Oxford has even analysed residues found in some of these ovens. Their findings confirm that wheat and barley flour were the most common ingredients used in the city's bread production during the 1st century. The baker notices you watching and smiles briefly before returning to his work. Farther along the street, the atmosphere grows busier. Stalls appear along the edges of the road where merchants arrange their goods on wooden tables or woven mats. One man displays bronze lamps shaped like small shallow bowls. Another spreads dyed cloth across a bench, the colours glowing softly in the growing sunlight. The sounds begin to layer together. The rhythmic scrape of a broom sweeping dust from a doorway. The clatter of a metal ladle striking the rim of a cooking pot. The occasional bray of a donkey announcing its impatience. Above all of this rises the hum of conversation. Some voices speak the familiar local dialect of Aramaic. Others carry accents from distant regions. Greek phrases drift through the air as traders from Mediterranean cities negotiate prices. Jerusalem is not isolated. It sits at the intersection of several ancient travel routes connecting Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean world. Merchants passing through the city bring with them languages, customs, and goods from far beyond these hills. Records preserved in Roman administrative documents confirm that Jerusalem functioned as a significant religious and commercial hub within the eastern provinces of the empire. The flow of pilgrims visiting the temple ensured that markets remained active throughout much of the year. Oddly enough, ancient writers occasionally complained about the congestion these crowds create. One curious anecdote preserved in later historical commentary mentions that during busy pilgrimage seasons the narrow streets could become so crowded that travellers sometimes spent hours inching forward through packed lanes near the temple district. As you continue climbing the street, the slope steepens slightly. Your legs begin to notice the effort required to move uphill. The buildings grow taller around you, their stone walls blocking much of the wind. Sunlight filters down in thin angled beams between rooftops. In one doorway, a carpenter works quietly. Wood shavings curl across the floor around his feet. A simple bench holds several tools made from iron and wood. The smell of fresh-cut timber drifts into the street as he shaves a beam into shape with steady strokes. Such workshops appear frequently throughout the city. Archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence of small craft industries scattered across Jerusalem's residential districts. Potters, metalworkers, leatherworkers, and carpenters all practice their trades within modest spaces attached to homes or courtyard buildings. Daily life blends easily with production here. A child sits nearby watching the carpenters work while holding a small wooden toy. Across the lane, a woman pours water from a clay jug into a basin where vegetables wait to be washed. The closeness of these scenes creates a sense that the city breathes collectively. Every movement contributes to the rhythm of the whole. Scholars continue to debate how densely populated Jerusalem truly was during the early 1st century. Some argue that the steep terrain limited expansion, forcing residents to build tightly packed neighborhoods. Others suggest that parts of the city contained more open courtyards and garden spaces than previously assumed. Archaeology provides pieces of the puzzle, but not the entire picture. What cannot be debated is the feeling of closeness these streets produce. As you climb farther uphill, the road bends gently to the right. The view suddenly opens for a brief moment between two buildings. Through the gap, you glimpse something striking rising above the rooftops. A section of gleaming white stone wall catches the sunlight brilliantly. Even from this distance, it reflects the morning light so strongly that you instinctively narrow your eyes. The temple! Though still several streets away, its immense platform and surrounding walls already dominate the skyline. The structure rises higher than the houses around you, appearing almost like a separate city layered above the first. Travelers walking beside you also notice it. Some glance upward quietly. Others whisper brief prayers as they continue along the street. The sight seems to draw everyone forward. Your steps continue uphill, guided by curiosity and by the subtle gravity that the sacred centre of Jerusalem exerts on the entire city. Behind you, the gate where you entered now lies hidden among twisting streets. Ahead, the city continues unfolding. The street narrows again as you continue climbing, and the bustle of the lower market gradually softens behind you. Here, the pace of life changes slightly. The stalls and merchant tables become fewer. Instead, the buildings appear more solid and quiet, their thick stone walls forming narrow corridors of shade along the rising road. You begin to notice the homes. From the outside, they appear modest, almost severe. Most are constructed from the same pale limestone blocks that form the city walls and streets. The stones fit together tightly, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of sun and wind. A simple wooden door marks the entrance to one of these houses. It stands slightly open. Inside, the interior reveals itself as a small courtyard surrounded by rooms. Sunlight spills down into the centre where a stone basin collects water. Clay jars stand along the wall, their rounded shapes casting soft shadows across the floor. This style of house is remarkably common in ancient Jerusalem. Archaeological excavations across the city have uncovered numerous examples of similar domestic layouts. Researchers associated with institutions such as Oxford and Stanford have studied these homes closely, identifying a recurring architectural pattern, sometimes called the courtyard house. Families organized their daily lives around an open central space that allowed light and air to reach the surrounding rooms. You step quietly past the doorway and pause for a moment near the entrance. A woman kneels beside the basin, washing leafy herbs in cool water. She lifts them carefully, letting droplets fall back into the bowl before placing them in a woven basket. The scent drifts outward into the street. Fresh greens mix with the faint mineral smell of limestone dust. Across the courtyard, a child sits cross-legged beside a pile of lentils spread across a cloth. Small hands move slowly through the grains, removing bits of pebble or husk. Sorting food like this is a daily task in nearly every household. Ancient cooking in Jerusalem often relied on simple ingredients: lentils, barley, olives, figs, dates, and occasionally fish or meat when available. Clay cooking pots sit nearby along the wall, darkened by years of smoke from small hearth fires. You notice something unusual on the floor near one corner. Several smooth stone cylinders lie beside a shallow basin carved from rock. These are grinding stones. Families use them to crush grain into flour each morning before baking bread. One fascinating detail discovered by archaeologists is the wear pattern found on many of these grinding stones. Studies published in scientific journals have shown that the surfaces often display consistent grooves formed by a repeated circular motion over long periods. This evidence provides a surprisingly intimate glimpse into the physical rhythm of daily work carried out inside these homes. The woman in the courtyard looks up briefly as you pass. She offers a polite nod, then returns to her task. You continue along the street where another doorway reveals a slightly different scene. Here the house includes a staircase leading upward toward the roof. The steps are narrow and worn smooth by many years of use. Curiosity draws your gaze upward. Flat rooftops are a defining feature of houses throughout this region. Unlike the steep roofs common in colder climates, homes here are designed with level surfaces where families can gather during the cooler hours of evening. You climb the steps slowly. At the top, the city spreads out before you in quiet layers of stone. The rooftop itself is simple. Packed earth mixed with crushed limestone forms a firm surface beneath your feet. Low parapet walls edge the perimeter for safety. From here, you can see other rooftops stretching outward in every direction. Some hold drying herbs spread across cloths, others contain small storage jars or baskets. A few families have placed woven-up mats where people may sit and rest during the evening. Children's laughter drifts from a nearby roof where two young boys chase each other between clay jars. Life here extends upward as much as outward. Records preserved in ancient texts suggest that rooftops sometimes served as places for prayer conversation or even sleeping during especially warm nights. The elevated position allowed breezes to pass over the houses more easily than within the narrow streets below. Oddly enough, archaeologists have occasionally discovered fragments of roof plaster embedded with straw fibres. This mixture helped waterproof the surface while preventing cracks under the intense summer sun. From this height, you also notice how tightly the houses cluster together. Their walls form a patchwork of pale stone rectangles stretching across the slope of the hill. Only narrow lanes separate them. In many places, the distance between opposing roofs is so small that neighbours could easily speak to one another across the gap. Such closeness shaped the social life of the city. Voices carried quickly from house to house. News travelled almost instantly through conversations shared across these elevated spaces. Scholars still disagree on the exact number of residents living within Jerusalem's walls during the early 1st century. Some estimates propose around 40,000 inhabitants during ordinary months. Others argue the figure may have been somewhat higher. Archaeological remains alone cannot fully resolve the debate, yet the compact layout of these neighbourhoods suggests that every available space was carefully used. Standing on the roof, you begin to sense the quiet complexity of the city. Smoke rises gently from dozens of small cooking fires. The smell of baking bread drifts through the air. Somewhere a rooster calls out across the rooftops. And beyond all of this, the gleaming upper walls of the temple catch the sun once more. Even here, among ordinary homes, its presence remains constant. The sacred centre of Jerusalem seems to watch over every courtyard, every rooftop, every narrow street where daily life unfolds. You descend the staircase again and return to the lane. The street continues upward, and the deeper layers of the city wait just ahead. The lane widens slightly as you continue upward, and the quiet residential rhythm of courtyards and rooftops slowly gives way to a rising hum of commerce. The sound reaches you before the full view does. Voices layered upon voices, the shuffle of sandals across stone, a donkey's impatient snort, metal rings clinking softly against one another. Then the street opens into a busy marketplace. Tables, baskets, and woven mats cover the ground and lean against walls. Traders stand behind their goods, speaking animatedly to passing buyers. The narrow road becomes a slow-moving river of people flowing between stalls. The first scent you notice is spice. Coriander, cumin, and crushed garlic drift through the air, mixing with the warm smell of fresh bread from nearby ovens. The aromas swirl together, forming a fragrance both earthy and sharp. Jerusalem's markets are not merely places of trade. They are the meeting point of entire regions. A merchant seated beside a low wooden table carefully arranges small piles of dried figs. Their wrinkled skins shine faintly in the sunlight. Next to him sits a basket of dates sticky with natural sugar and darker in colour. He watches the crowd with patient eyes. Beside him, another trader lifts a strip of dyed cloth to display its deep blue colour. The fabric ripples gently in the breeze that moves between the buildings. That blue dye may have travelled a very long distance. Historical records confirm that some of the most prized dyes in the ancient Mediterranean came from coastal regions where tiny sea snails produced rare pigments used in textiles. These colours were expensive, often associated with wealth or ceremonial garments. Researchers studying textile fragments discovered in archaeological contexts around Jerusalem have confirmed the presence of imported dyed fabrics in the city during the Roman period. Even here, far from the sea, global trade leaves its quiet mark. A few steps farther into the marketplace, you hear the rhythmic tapping of metal tools. A bronze worker sits cross-legged beside a small anvil hammering the rim of a shallow lamp. Each strike produces a soft ringing note that blends with the market's constant murmur. These lamps will likely illuminate homes throughout the city tonight. Their simple design is familiar across much of the Roman world. A small reservoir holds olive oil while a wick burns gently from a narrow spout. When lit, the flame flickers softly, casting a golden glow across stone walls and wooden beams. Archaeologists have recovered people's instances of such lamps from Jerusalem's ancient layers. Their shapes changed gradually over time, allowing researchers to estimate the approximate date of different occupation levels within the city. A single broken lamp fragment can sometimes reveal more about a historical period than one might have picked. You move slowly through the crowd. Travellers from many regions mingle here. Their clothing varies in style and colour. Some wear long woolen cloaks suitable for cooler highland climates. Others appear dressed in lighter fabrics, common in coastal cities. Languages drift through the air. Aramaic remains the most common speech among local residents. Yet Greek phrases appear frequently in negotiations between merchants and visitors from distant provinces of the empire. A curious historical aside mentions that some shopkeepers in Jerusalem likely knew enough Greek to bargain with foreign travellers, even if it was not their native language. Such linguistic flexibility helped keep trade flowing smoothly. At one corner of the market, a man tends several cages containing doves. Their soft cooing rises gently above the crowd's noise. The birds flutter occasionally when someone passes too close. Doves serve a specific purpose here. Pilgrims visiting the temple often purchase animals for sacrificial offerings. Wealthier visitors might present sheep or cattle. Others bring smaller animals, such as doves, which remain more affordable. Ancient sources describe these animal markets operating near areas where pilgrims prepared for worship. The connection between commerce and religious life runs deep in Jerusalem. Oddly enough, one surviving commentary from later historians suggests that the noise and bustle of animal sellers near the temple occasionally irritated certain religious teachers of the time. The mixture of sacred ritual and practical trade created tensions that observers sometimes criticized. Even today, scholars still debate the exact location of these animal markets and how closely they operated to the temple courts themselves. Archaeological evidence provides clues but leaves room for discussion. The marketplace continues stretching along the rising street. Baskets overflow with olives glistening in brine. Clay jars filled with honey stand beside wooden spoons ready for tasting. A woman sells bundles of herbs tied neatly with twine. Every few steps brings a new sight. A boy carries a tray of warm pastries dusted lightly with crushed nuts. A potter carefully unwraps newly fired bowls from cloth padding. A merchant weighs small lumps of incense resin on a delicate bronze scale. The incense catches your attention. When burned, the resin releases a sweet, smoky fragrance often used in religious ceremonies. Some varieties come from distant desert regions far south of Judea, transported along caravan routes crossing Arabia. Trade networks stretching thousands of kilometers quietly converge in this small marketplace. Historians studying ancient trade routes frequently point out that Jerusalem occupied an important intersection between Mediterranean ports and inland caravan paths. Goods moving through the region passed naturally through cities like this one. The market therefore reflects the wider world, and yet amid the commerce daily life continues in simple ways. A young girl helps her father arrange clay cups in neat rows. An elderly man sits beside a stall weaving thin reeds into baskets. A group of travellers pauses to drink water from a public jar set along the wall. Above all of it, sunlight pours into the open street. The brightness reveals dust drifting slowly through the air. It glows faintly around the edges of baskets, jars, and hanging fabrics. You pause for a moment near the centre of the market. Looking upward between the rooftops, you see it again, the pale walls of this temple complex rising higher than every surrounding structure. Even here, among the laughter of merchants and the clatter of trade, the sacred heart of Jerusalem remains visible. Almost every street seems to lead toward it, and so carried by the slow current of the crowd, you continue climbing. As the market slowly fades behind you, the street bends again and becomes quieter. The noise of bargaining voices and clattering tools dissolves into a softer rhythm of footsteps and distant conversation. Yet something important lies beneath the stones you are walking on. Water. In a city built upon a narrow ridge surrounded by dry hills, water is more precious than almost anything else. Jerusalem does not sit beside a wide river like the cities of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Instead, it survives through ingenuity, careful planning, and an intricate system of springs, channels, and hidden tunnels. You notice one of these systems almost immediately. Along the side of the street stands a public water basin carved directly into stone. A clay jar rests beside it, while a woman carefully fills it using a smaller jug. Water trickles from a narrow spout in a steady stream, splashing gently into the basin. The sound is surprisingly soothing. Travellers pause nearby to drink. Donkeys lower their heads to lap the cool water. For a moment, the small gathering becomes quiet, as if everyone instinctively respects the importance of the source before them. This water likely begins its journey far below the city. To the southeast of Jerusalem lies the Gihon Spring, one of the primary natural water sources that sustain the city for centuries. Long before the time you're walking through now, engineers developed ingenious methods to channel that water safely inside the city's defences. Records preserved by historians confirm that an ambitious project during the reign of King Hezekiah created a long underground tunnel that redirected water from the spring into a protected reservoir within the city walls. Modern archaeological exploration has confirmed the remarkable accuracy of those ancient descriptions. Researchers from institutions such as Stanford and Oxford have carefully mapped the winding tunnel, which stretches more than 500 meters beneath the rock. The channel twists through the limestone like a subterranean corridor, its walls still bearing the chisel marks left by workers more than 2,000 years ago. The water that flows through Jerusalem today may follow the same hidden pathways carved in those distant centuries. Curiously enough, one fascinating discovery inside that tunnel revealed an ancient inscription carved by the workers who completed it. The text describes the moment when two teams digging from opposite ends finally met in the middle of the rock. The inscription celebrates the sound of voices calling through the stone just before the final breakthrough. It's one of the most intimate engineering records preserved from the ancient world. You continue walking uphill and soon notice another feature connected to the city's water system. A staircase descends along the side of the street toward a shaded opening in the rock. The air drifting upward from below feels cooler and slightly damp. These descending steps lead toward a subterranean reservoir. In ancient Jerusalem, large underground pools collected and stored water for times when the spring might flow less strongly or when the city faced siege. Some of these pools were enormous by the standards of the time. Archaeological excavations have uncovered massive cisterns carved into the bedrock beneath the Temple Mount and other parts of the city. Many were lined with waterproof plaster that helped preserve the stored water for long periods. Standing near the entrance, you can almost hear faint echoes rising from the chamber below. Water dripping slowly into the reservoir. Footsteps from someone climbing upward, carrying a full jar. The cool air brushing your face carries the faint mineral scent of damp stone. Oddly enough, historians note that visitors unfamiliar with Jerusalem's water system sometimes found it confusing or even mysterious. Because so much of the infrastructure lay hidden underground, travellers could easily pass through the city without realising how carefully engineered the supply truly was. Without these tunnels and cisterns, Jerusalem could never have supported its population. Scholars still debate exactly how much water the city's system could deliver each day. Some estimates suggest that the network of channels and reservoirs allowed tens of thousands of residents and visitors to access sufficient water even during dry seasons. Others argue the system required constant maintenance and careful rationing. Either way, survival in this landscape demanded constant attention to water management. You resume your climb along the street. A boy carrying two clay jars balanced on a wooden yoke across his shoulders passes you carefully. The jars sway gently as he walks, and small droplets of water spill down their sides onto the stones. His task is routine. Every household requires water for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. Children often assist in these daily journeys to wells or basins scattered throughout the city. The rhythm of footsteps continues. Stone walls on either side reflect the rising warmth of the sun. From a nearby courtyard comes the sound of someone drawing water from a private cistern using a rope and bucket. The rope creaks softly against the pulley. You realize that beneath nearly every building lies some form of storage chamber carved into the rock. Rainwater collected from rooftops often flows through small channels into these underground reservoirs. Jerusalem is a city built not only upward along its hills, but downward into the stone beneath. Engineers, masons, and labourers across many generations shaped these hidden spaces with extraordinary patience. Some scholars still argue about when certain sections of the water system were expanded or modified. Archaeological layers show evidence of repairs and alterations across centuries. Each generation inherited the work of those who came before and adapted it to the needs of their time. The city above may change with each era, but the water below continues its quiet journey through darkness. You pause for a moment beside the basin once more and dip your fingers into the flowing stream. The water feels cool against your skin despite the growing warmth of the day. A simple fancying, yet one that connects you directly to the unseen foundations of Jerusalem. Then, drying your hand on your cloak, you continue climbing towards the brighter streets ahead. As the street climbs higher, something begins to change in the atmosphere around you. The market noise behind you fades into the distance, replaced by a quieter but more purposeful movement of people. The street widens again and the buildings on either side become taller and more solid. Their walls appear freshly cut, the stone blocks larger and more precisely fitted than those of the homes lower down the slope. Your eyes lift naturally toward the skyline. Now the temple stands fully before you. It rises above Jerusalem with a scale that feels almost startling. The platform on which it rests is immense, a vast rectangular terrace carved and constructed atop the hill. Massive retaining walls support the structure, their stones stacked in careful rows that seem almost too large to have been placed by human hands. Sunlight pours across the pale diapom. For a moment, the brightness makes the walls appear almost luminous. Ancient writers once remarked that when the morning sun struck the temple's outer stones, the glare could be so strong that visitors approaching the city sometimes had to shield their eyes. Polished surfaces and white stone reflected the light in a way that made the structure visible from great distances across the Judean hills. Modern archaeological studies carried out by researchers connected with Oxford and Stanford have confirmed the extraordinary scale of this construction. Some of the foundation stones used to support the temple platform weigh hundreds of tons, making them among the largest building stones ever used in the ancient world. You walk closer. The road now leads toward a series of steps climbing upward along the southern side of the Temple Mount. Pilgrims move steadily along this route, their pace calm and deliberate. Some speak quietly to companions. Others walk in silence, their eyes fixed on the towering walls ahead. The closer you come, the more details begin to appear. The stones themselves are enormous. Each block is carefully shaped with a distinctive smooth centre surrounded by a narrow chiseled frame. This style of masonry, often associated with the reign of King Herod the Great, allowed builders to create walls that appeared both strong and elegant. The edges catch the sunlight while the recessed centres hold soft shadows. The effect gives the entire structure a sense of depth and precision. Near the base of the wall, you see groups of travellers pausing to rest before climbing the steps. Some wash their hands at nearby water basins. Others adjust their clothing or speak quietly among themselves. The air carries a faint mixture of scents: warm stone heated by the rising sun, smoke drifting from distant cooking fires, and something sweeter that seems to float faintly above the city: incense. Within the temple complex, priests conduct rituals that include the burning of aromatic resins. When the wind shifts just right, the fragrance drifts down across the surrounding streets. It gives the entire area a subtle, sacred atmosphere. Oddly enough, one small detail noted by historians is that many pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem for the first time described a powerful emotional reaction when they first saw the temple. Some ancient accounts mention visitors stopping abruptly in the street simply to stare at the gleaming structure. You can easily understand why. The temple is not only large, it is visually commanding in a way that few other buildings of the ancient world could match. Yet scholars still debate certain aspects of its appearance. Archaeology has revealed the enormous platform and many surrounding structures, but the precise design of the upper sanctuary remains partly uncertain. Some historians reconstruct the temple with golden decorative panels and elaborate carvings. Others argue that its ornamentation may have been somewhat simpler than later descriptions suggest. Fragments of the truth survive scattered across ancient texts and archaeological remains. The rest must be carefully imagined. You continue toward the steps. The crowd around you grows denser as pilgrims gather along the approach routes. Some carry small animals for sacrifice. Others bring baskets containing offerings such as grain or incense. Families travel together. Older parents walk slowly while children move with restless curiosity, glancing upward at the towering walls that seem to rise endlessly above them. At the base of the stairway, the sound of footsteps becomes constant. Stone steps stretch upward in long wide rows. Their surfaces are worn smooth from countless generations climbing toward the sacred courts above. You place your foot on the first step. The stone feels cool beneath your sandal. From here, the city spreads behind you. If you glance over your shoulder, you can see rooftops cascading down the slope toward the distant gate where you first entered Jerusalem. Smoke curls gently upward from hundreds of hearths. The streets appear like narrow threads woven through the clustered houses, and above it all the temple stands at the center, a focal point not only of architecture but of belief. Historians often remark that Jerusalem during this period functioned as both a religious capital and a symbol of identity for Jewish communities scattered across the Roman world. Pilgrims travelling from distant provinces viewed the temple as the spiritual heart of their faith. The steps beneath your feet carry that meaning. Every climb represents more than a physical ascent. It's a movement towards something sacred. You continue upward slowly with the others, the enormous walls rising on either side, the scent of incense growing slightly stronger with every step. And beyond the top of the stairway waits the vast courtyard of the temple itself. The final steps rise slowly beneath your feet, and with each one the noise of the city behind you fades further away. At the top the space opens suddenly. Where the streets of Jerusalem twisted narrowly between houses and workshops, the temple courts spread outward in wide terraces of pale stone. The contrast is striking. After the confined lanes below, the openness here feels almost overwhelming. You step forward into the vast courtyard. The ground beneath you is paved with large rectangular stones fitted so precisely that the seams between them are barely visible. Sunlight pours across the surface, reflecting softly upward so that the entire space seems filled with brightness. The temple complex is enormous. Long colonnades stretch along the edges of the platform, their tall pillars supporting shaded walkways where people move slowly in quiet conversation. The columns cast long parallel shadows across the pavement. Pilgrims from every direction gather here. Some stand in small groups speaking softly. Others kneel in prayer facing the inner sanctuary. A few travellers simply gaze upward, absorbing the sight of the sacred structures that dominate the centre of the platform. The main sanctuary rises ahead of you. Its walls gleam with a pale stone and the upper portions appear decorated with gold that catches the sunlight in sharp flashes. Even from this distance, the building commands attention with its height and symmetry. Ancient historical records describe how the temple complex, built during the reign of Herod the Great, became one of the most impressive architectural projects in the Eastern Roman world. Roman historians themselves commented on its grandeur. Modern archaeological investigations conducted by teams associated with institutions such as Stanford and Oxford have confirmed the immense scale of the platform supporting the temple. The expanded mount covered more than 30 acres, making it one of the largest sacred precincts of the ancient world. Standing here, the numbers become easier to imagine. Thousands of people could gather within these courts at the same time, and on certain days they did. A group of priests moves across the courtyard nearby. Their garments are simple yet distinctive. Long white robes catch the sunlight as they walk with deliberate calm. Some carry vessels used in ritual ceremonies. Others speak quietly to pilgrims seeking guidance. The scent of incense grows stronger as the breeze shifts. It drifts outward from the sanctuary area where offerings are prepared. The fragrance is sweet, almost honeyed, with a faint pulgate that lingers in the air. You also hear animals. Sheep bleat softly from an area set aside for sacrificial offerings. Doves flutter inside small cages carried by pilgrims waiting for their turn to present them. The mixture of sacred ritual and everyday life creates a unique atmosphere. Children walk beside their parents holding baskets of grain offerings. Elderly visitors lean on staffs while observing the ceremonies unfolding around them. Oddly enough, one curious historical detail recorded in ancient writings describes how the temple courts also functioned as places for teaching and discussion. Religious scholars sometimes gathered here to debate interpretations of sacred texts while listeners formed small circles around them. You can almost imagine such a conversation unfolding nearby. Perhaps a teacher gestures thoughtfully while explaining a passage of scripture. A group of students listens closely, occasionally asking questions that spark lively discussion. In a place so central to religious life, intellectual debate naturally flourishes. Yet historians continue to disagree about certain aspects of daily activity within the temple complex. Some scholars suggest that the outer courts resembled bustling civic spaces filled with conversation and movement. Others argue that stricter rules governed behavior, maintaining a more solemn environment. The truth may have varied depending on the day and the crowd. As you move slowly across the courtyard, the size of the complex becomes clearer. Stone stairways lead upward to additional terraces. Gateways mark entrances into progressively more restricted areas of the sanctuary. Not everyone is permitted beyond certain points. Signs carved into stone warn visitors where access becomes limited. Fragments of such warning inscriptions have actually been discovered by archaeologists. The texts cautioned non-Jewish visitors not to enter inner sections of the temple precinct under penalty of severe consequences. These discoveries provide rare confirmation of ancient descriptions recorded by historians of the time. You pause beneath the shade of a colonnade. The pillars beside you are enormous. Their smooth surfaces rise far above your head before supporting the roof of the walkway. Beneath the shade, the air feels cooler and calmer. From here, you can observe the life of the temple unfolding across the open court. Priests moving in measured patterns. Pilgrims approaching the altar with offerings. Families standing quietly together while prayers are spoken. The soundscape is surprisingly gentle. Footsteps echo softly across the stone pavement. Distant voices blend into a low murmur. Occasionally, a dove flutters upward into the sunlight before settling again near the colonnade. Beyond the sanctuary walls, the city of Jerusalem continues its ordinary rhythm of markets and homes. But here within the temple courts, time seems to move differently. The place holds a sense of permanence. Generations that have climbed these same steps. Countless prayers have been spoken in these open spaces. The stones themselves feel heavy with memory. You step out from the shade again and look toward the inner sanctuary. The golden reflections shimmer faintly in the sunlight. For a moment, the entire city seems to revolve around this sacred center, and in many ways it does. From the shaded colonnade of the temple courts, your gaze drifts outward toward the northern edge of the complex. There, rising like a stern guardian above the sacred terraces, stands a structure very different in character from the temple, the Antonia Fortress. Its stone towers climb sharply into the sky, casting angular shadows across the surrounding walls. Where the temple architecture feels ceremonial and graceful, the fortress appears severe and practical. Its battlements, watchtowers, and narrow windows speak the language of military power rather than prayer. Roman authority rests there. Even though Jerusalem is a deeply religious city, it exists within the vast machinery of the Roman Empire. Soldiers stationed in the fortress observe the temple courts constantly, particularly during festivals when crowds grow large and the emotions can run high. You notice movement along the fortress walls. A pair of Roman soldiers walk slowly along the ramparts, their helmets catching flashes of sunlight. Their armor glints briefly each time they turn. From this distance you cannot hear their voices, but the rhythm of their patrol is steady and deliberate. Their presence is quiet but unmistakable. Historians studying Roman administration in Judea often emphasize how carefully the empire balanced control with local religious customs. Roman governors typically allowed the temple to function under the authority of Jewish priests, yet military oversight remained close enough to intervene if unrest threatened. Records preserved by Roman historians confirm that troops stationed in the Antonia fortress could quickly descend stairways leading directly into the temple area if disturbances arose. The architecture itself reflects this purpose. Archaeological investigations conducted by researchers from institutions including Oxford and Stanford suggest that the fortress occupied a strategic corner of the Temple Mount, allowing soldiers to monitor both the sacred complex and nearby streets. From where you stand, the arrangement becomes clear. The fortress towers above the sanctuary like a silent observer. Curiously enough, one ancient writer described the fortress as resembling a miniature city attached to the temple itself. Within its walls, Roman soldiers lived, trained and maintained their equipment, while watching over the restless political landscape of Judea. You begin walking slowly along the outer edge of the temple platform. Pilgrims continue passing beside you, many focused entirely on their spiritual duties. Yet some also glance occasionally toward the looming fortress. Its presence cannot be ignored. For many residents of Jerusalem, the relationship between religious life and imperial power is complicated. Roman rule has brought roads, trade, stability, and connections to a wider world stretching from Britain to Egypt. Yet it has also introduced taxation, political tension, and a foreign military presence within a deeply sacred city. Scholars still argue about how different groups within Jerusalem reacted to Roman governance during this period. Some historians suggest that many citizens accepted the arrangement as a practical reality of life under empire. Others emphasize growing frustration and resistance among certain factions who viewed Roman rule as an unacceptable intrusion. The debates continue even today among modern historians trying to reconstruct the political mood of the city. You pause near the edge of the temple platform and look out across Jerusalem once more. From this elevated position, the city spreads beneath you like a mosaic of rooftops and narrow streets. Smoke drifts upward from cooking fires. Tiny figures move along distant lanes carrying baskets or leading animals. Beyond the walls, the hills of Judea roll outward in pale waves toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills lie Roman roads stretching toward the great port cities of the Mediterranean. Caravans move along those routes daily, connecting Jerusalem with the vast economic networks of the empire. Even here in the sacred heart of the city, the wider world presses close. A trumpet sound echoes faintly from the direction of the fortress. The sharp note cuts briefly through the quiet murmur of the temple courts. It may signal a change of guard or some routine command given among the soldiers above. Pilgrims nearby glance up for a moment, then return to their prayers. Life continues. Oddly enough, a curious historical anecdote preserved in later writings describes how some Roman soldiers stationed near the temple occasionally became familiar with certain rituals simply by observing them day after day from the fortress walls. Though they remained outsiders to the faith practiced below, the rhythms of Jerusalem's sacred life gradually became part of their daily environment. You continue walking along the platform. The contrast between the temple and the fortress becomes clearer with each step. One structure represents devotion and centuries of tradition. The other represents imperial authority extending across continents. Both stand side by side upon the same hill. Historians often point out that such proximity made Jerusalem a uniquely sensitive political environment. Religious passion, cultural identity, and imperial administration intersected here in ways rarely seen elsewhere in the Roman world. The tension does not dominate every moment of daily life, yet it exists quietly beneath the surface. Like the unseen water tunnels beneath the city's streets, political pressure flows through hidden channels that occasionally surface when circumstances demand. You rest your hand lightly on the stone parapet overlooking the city. The rock feels warm now under the growing sun. Above you, the Roman soldiers continue their slow patrol. Below you, pilgrims move through the temple courts in peaceful devotion. Jerusalem holds both worlds at once. And for now, the balance remains. Leaving the wide temple courts behind your path eventually leads down a quieter street that slopes gently toward one of the city gates. The air feels different here. The dense mixture of incense, stone dust, and crowded voices slowly fades as the buildings thin and the streets widen. Jerusalem's tightly packed houses begin to give way to small gardens and open spaces that cling to the edges of the city walls. You walk through a narrow archway in the outer wall. Beyond it, the world changes almost instantly. The noise of the city softens behind you while the countryside stretches quietly ahead. Terraced hills roll outward beneath the bright sky, their slopes carefully shaped into long horizontal steps that hold soil and water for cultivation. Olive trees grow here in scattered rows. Their trunks twist in ancient shapes, bark cracked and silver-grey from decades of wind and sun. The leaves shimmer softly when the breeze passes through them, flashing pale green and silver under the sunlight. The scent in the air shifts again. Now you smell warm earth-crushed grass and the faint bitterness of olive leaves. A few bees drift lazily between small patches of wildflowers growing along the terrace edges. Just beyond the walls of Jerusalem, life returns to a slower rhythm. A farmer kneels beside a stone-lined garden bed, loosening the soil with a wooden tool. Nearby, a woman gathers herbs into a woven basket. Their movements are steady and practiced, shaped by routines repeated day after day. These gardens play an important role in feeding the city. While trade routes bring food from distant regions, many families in Jerusalem rely on small agricultural plots scattered across the surrounding hills. Terracing allows farmers to grow crops even on steep slopes, preventing soil from washing away during winter rains. Archaeological surveys conducted by researchers affiliated with institutions such as Oxford and Stanford have identified extensive terraced farming systems across the Judean hills. Many of these terraces date back thousands of years and continue to support agriculture throughout the Roman period. Standing here, you can see why such careful land shaping was necessary. Without terraces, the thin soil covering these rocky hills would quickly erode. Instead, stone walls hold the earth in place, creating narrow strips of fertile ground where crops can grow. A curious historical aside mentions that olive cultivation in this region has such deep roots that some trees in the Judean hills may descend from ancient groves planted thousands of years ago. While the exact age of individual trees is difficult to determine, the tradition of olive farming here stretches far beyond the lifetime of any single generation. You walk slowly along a narrow path between the terraces. The ground feels softer beneath your sandals than the stone streets of the city. Small pebbles shift gently as you move. In the distance, shepherds guide a small flock of sheep across a hillside. Their bells produce faint metallic notes that drift across the valley in irregular patterns. Beyond them lies another familiar place. The Mount of Olives rises east of the city, its slopes dotted with groves of trees similar to those around you. From its higher points, travellers can look back across the Kidron Valley toward the walls of Jerusalem. Many visitors approaching the city for the first time pause there to take in the view. From that vantage point, the temple gleams brightly above the rooftops, visible across the valley like a beacon of white stone. Scholars studying ancient pilgrimage routes often point out that the Mount of Olives likely served as one of the most dramatic viewing points for travellers arriving from the east. The sudden appearance of the temple across the valley created a powerful visual moment for those nearing the sacred city. Yet historians continue to debate how extensively these surrounding hills were cultivated during the early 1st century. Some archaeological evidence suggests dense agricultural activity with vineyards, orchards and gardens covering much of the terrain. Other researchers propose that certain areas may have remained more rugged and lightly used. The truth probably varied across different slopes and seasons. As you continue along the path, the quiet of the countryside deepens. A breeze rustles through the olive branches overhead. Sunlight filters through the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow across the ground. From here, you can see the walls of Jerusalem rising behind you. The city appears both close and distant at the same time. From within its streets, the narrow lanes and crowded markets feel overwhelming. Yet from this hillside vantage point, Jerusalem seems almost peaceful, its pale buildings blending gently into the surrounding stone landscape. Smoke curls upward from cooking fires within the walls. The temple's bright surfaces still shine above everything else. Even here, among fields and trees, the sacred heart of the city remains visible. You sit briefly on a low stone wall separating two terraces. The stone feels warm from the afternoon sun. A small lizard darts across the rocks nearby before disappearing into a crevice. For a moment, the entire landscape rests in quiet balance. The city behind you, the hills before you, and the slow rhythms of agriculture continuing much as they have for centuries. Soon you will return through the gate again back into the narrow streets and busy courtyards. But for now, the countryside offers a gentle reminder. Jerusalem may stand at the centre of faith and politics, yet it remains deeply tied to the land that surrounds it. When you eventually return through the city gate, the light has already begun to soften. The long afternoon shadows stretch across Jerusalem's streets, reaching like dark fingers between the houses. The markets that bustled earlier in the day are quieter now. Many stalls are being packed away. Baskets of figs and olives disappear beneath cloth covers while merchants count small stacks of coins. The city exhales after its busy hours. As you walk uphill once more through the narrow lanes, you notice the shift in rhythm. The hurried pace of commerce gives way to the slower routines of evening. A woman pours water across the stones in front of her doorway, washing away the dust gathered throughout the day. The water trickles along shallow grooves worn into the pavement, carrying tiny grains of sand toward the lower streets. From inside nearby homes comes the soft clatter of cooking vessels. Clay pots are being placed over small hearth fires. The smell of lentils simmering in broth drifts through open doorways. Somewhere a handful of garlic is crushed beneath a stone pestle, releasing its sharp fragrance into the air. The scent of evening meals spreads gradually across the city. You pass beneath the line of laundry strung between two upper windows. The cloth brushes gently against your shoulder as the breeze moves through the narrow street. Above you, the rooftops begin to glow with warm light. Oil lamps flicker to life one by one as the sun sinks toward the western hills. Their small flames appear first as tiny golden points, then gradually multiply until the entire hillside seems sprinkled with gentle stars. Ancient Jerusalem after sunset must have looked remarkably different from the brilliant daylight city. Without modern lighting, the night world here belongs to lamps, moonlight, and shadow. Archaeological excavations across the city have uncovered thousands of small clay oil lamps dating to the 1st century. Many are simple moulded vessels designed to burn olive oil with a cotton wick. Their modest flames provide just enough light for conversation, cooking, or prayer. Researchers affiliated with institutions such as Stanford and Oxford have studied soot deposits and wear patterns on these lamps, revealing how frequently they were used within domestic spaces. A single household might burn several each evening. You continue walking through the twilight streets. Children gather near a doorway where an older man sits telling a story. His voice rises and falls slowly while the children listen with wide eyes. Occasionally one interrupts with a question, prompting laughter from the group. Storytelling becomes an important part of evening life. After the day's labour ends, families gather to share food news and stories beneath the growing darkness. A curious historical detail preserved in ancient cultural studies suggests that rooftop spaces often served as informal gathering areas during warm nights. Families sometimes climbed their staircases after dinner to enjoy cooler air and quiet conversation beneath the stars. Looking upward now, you can see silhouettes of people sitting along the edges of several rooftops. Their voices drift softly downward. The city gradually transforms into a layered soundscape of distant conversations, clinking dishes, and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere in the alleys. Yet even as night approaches, the temple remains visible. Its upper walls catch the final rays of sunlight glowing faintly above the rooftops. The brilliance of the afternoon fades, replaced by a softer golden tone that lingers across the stone. Priests still move within the sanctuary. Temple rituals continue at specific times of the day, including evening offerings. Though you cannot see the ceremonies clearly from the street, the faint scent of incense occasionally drifts outward on the cooling breeze. The fragrance mixes with the smell of cooking fires rising across Jerusalem. Smoke curls gently upward between the buildings. Historians still debate how brightly the temple itself may have been illuminated after sunset. Some scholars believe that lamps and torches within the sanctuary created a visible glow above the complex during evening rituals. Others argue that the lighting may have remained modest, preserving the solemn atmosphere of the sacred precinct. Either way, the temple remains a quiet presence over the darkening city. You reach a small open courtyard where several families have gathered for their evening meal. Flat bread rests on woven trays beside bowls of lentils and olives. A clay jug of water passes slowly from hand to hand. The conversation flows easily as people recount small events from the day. A boy lifts a lamp slightly higher so its light reaches the centre of the group. The flame flickers gently in the breeze. Oddly enough, some historians note that ancient urban nights were often far darker than modern visitors expect. Without electric light, only scattered lamps illuminated the streets. Once the moon rose or clouds covered the sky, entire neighbourhoods might sink into near-complete darkness. Yet within homes and courtyards, small circles of light continued glowing warmly. You pause briefly at the edge of the courtyard before moving on. The sky above Jerusalem deepens into shades of indigo. The first stars appear faintly over the hills beyond the walls. The city breathes slowly now. Markets sleep. Families gather. Lamps flicker across the rooftops like quiet constellations, and the ancient streets settle gently into the long calm of night. Morning arrives differently on festival days. Long before the first light reaches the hills of Judea, Jerusalem begins to stir with unusual energy. The quiet rhythm you witnessed the previous evening gives way to a rising wave of footsteps, voices, and distant animal sounds. From your place along one of the city's streets, you sense it immediately. Pilgrims are arriving. The gates that normally welcome a steady flow of travellers now receive a constant stream. Families pass through carrying bundles of food and blankets. Shepherds guide animals carefully along the crowded roads. Merchants hurry beside the flow hoping to reach the markets before the largest crowds gather. Today Jerusalem grows larger, much larger. Historical accounts preserved by ancient writers suggest that during major religious festivals such as Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, the population of the city expanded dramatically. Visitors came not only from nearby villages, but from distant Jewish communities scattered across the Roman world. Records confirm that pilgrims travelled from regions such as Egypt, Asia Minor, Greece, and even farther west. Modern historians working with research institutions like Oxford and Stanford have examined demographic patterns suggested by archaeological remains and historical texts. Many scholars agree that festival crowds likely multiplied the city's population several times over transforming the streets into rivers of movement. Standing in the street now, you feel that transformation unfolding. The lanes fill with travellers speaking many dialects. Some wear garments typical of Judea's countryside. Others carry cloaks woven in styles more common along Mediterranean coasts. Languages mix in the air. Aramaic remains the most familiar sound, but Greek phrases echo frequently among visiting merchants and pilgrims who have travelled from cities influenced by Hellenistic culture. A caravan of camels passes slowly through the crowd. Their long legs move with patient rhythm, while their handlers guide them carefully between pedestrians. Bundles tied across their backs contain provisions for the journey home. You notice many pilgrims carrying animals. Sheep walk quietly beside their owners. Cages filled with doves sway gently as families move uphill toward the temple. Each offering represents a deeply personal act of devotion. The streets leading toward the Temple Mount grow increasingly crowded. Vendors appear along the route offering breadfruit and small clay vessels. Some sell incense or ritual items that pilgrims may use during their visit. The air fills with a mixture of aromas. Warm bread fresh from ovens, dust stirred by thousands of footsteps, the faint sweetness of incense drifting from stalls and baskets. Oddly enough, several historical references mention that the logistical challenge of feeding and housing so many visitors became a defining feature of festival seasons in Jerusalem. Local residents sometimes opened spare rooms or courtyards to travelling pilgrims who had nowhere else to stay. This temporary hospitality helped the city absorb enormous numbers of guests during sacred celebrations. You continue walking with the crowd. The sound grows louder as more people converge on the roads leading upward. Conversations overlap into a constant hum. Occasionally, laughter breaks through the noise as families greet friends they have not seen since the previous year's pilgrimage. Children walk wide-eyed beside their parents, marvelling at the enormous walls and towers surrounding them. Some travellers pause along the street simply to rest and watch the spectacle unfold. Scholars continue to debate the exact scale of these gatherings. Some ancient writers describe crowds numbering in the hundreds of thousands, while modern historians caution that such figures may have been exaggerated. Archaeological evidence suggests that the city's infrastructure could support very large populations temporarily, yet precise numbers remains to. What cannot be doubted is the sense of movement. Jerusalem feels like a living tide. Every street carries waves of pilgrims slowly climbing toward the temple. As you approach the wider plazas near the sacred complex, the crowd thickens even more. Roman soldiers stationed near the fortress watch carefully from their positions. Their presence grows more noticeable during festivals when emotions and expectations run high. Despite the tension, the atmosphere among the pilgrims remains joyful. Songs occasionally rise from groups traveling together. The melodies drift through the streets, blending with the murmur of conversation and the steady rhythm of footsteps. One family begins singing a psalm as they climb the steps. Their voices echo softly between the stone walls, and soon several nearby travelers join the melody. The sound grows richer as it rises toward the temple above. Music becomes part of the pilgrimage itself. The sun finally clears the eastern hills. Its light pours across the temple walls, illuminating the terraces where thousands of visitors will soon gather for worship. You pause for a moment near the edge of the crowd. From this vantage point, the entire city seems alive with anticipation. Pilgrims are streaming through the gates, merchants preparing their stalls, priests moving within the temple courts to prepare the ceremonies ahead. Jerusalem, already vibrant on ordinary days, now expands into something far greater, a gathering place for an entire scattered world. As the festival crowds settle into their rhythms, you begin to notice something beyond the busy avenues and temple steps. Jerusalem is not only the grand courtyards and markets you've already seen. Hidden among the main streets are quieter corners. Small alleys twist away from the larger roads, slipping between buildings in ways that almost seem accidental. These narrow passages hold stories that the wider city rarely reveals. You wander into one such lane. Immediately, the noise of the main street softens behind you. The alley bends sharply between two tall walls of limestone, the stones rougher here than those used in the grander buildings closer to the temple. The ground slopes gently downward. Water trickles along a shallow channel cut into the pavement. Someone has recently washed a doorway nearby, and the thin stream carries away dust toward the lower streets. The air feels cooler here. Sunlight only reaches the alley in scattered patches where it slips between rooftops above. Most of the passage rests in a soft, dim shade. These quiet lanes are part of the city's true character. Archaeologists studying ancient Jerusalem often emphasize that the grand monuments represent only a fraction of the urban landscape. Excavations conducted by researchers connected with institutions such as Stanford and Oxford have uncovered entire networks of small residential streets, storage rooms, workshops, and courtyards hidden beneath later construction. Each layer reveals glimpses of ordinary lives lived far from the ceremonial spaces of the temple. You pass a small doorway set low into the wall. Inside lies a storage room carved partly into the bedrock beneath the house. Clay jars line the interior walls, their narrow necks sealed with cloth and wax. These vessels likely hold grain oil or dried fruit preserved for future use. Many homes in Jerusalem include such underground spaces. The bedrock beneath the city allowed residents to carve chambers directly into the stone. Some served as storage areas. Others became cisterns for collecting rainwater. A few may even have provided shelter during times of danger. One particularly fascinating discovery made by archaeologists involved a network of hidden passages beneath certain neighborhoods. While many of these spaces were simply storage areas, some appear to have connected multiple buildings in ways that allowed movement through the city without using the main streets. Historians still debate how extensively such passages were used. Some scholars argue they functioned mainly for practical storage. Others suggest they may have occasionally served as discrete routes for movement during periods of unrest. The exact purpose of many of these subterranean spaces remains uncertain. You continue along the alley where the walls narrow even further. A potter sits outside a small workshop shaping clay on a simple wheel. His hands move steadily, guiding the sinning clay upward into the form of a bowl. The wheel hums softly as it turns. Beside him, several finished vessels rest on a wooden shelf. Their surfaces show faint marks left by the potter's fingers. Soon they will be fired in a kiln nearby and carried to the markets you visited earlier. The potter glances up, briefly nodding politely before returning to his work. His quiet focus reflects the steady labour that sustains the city behind the scenes. Not every resident of Jerusalem spends time in the temple courts or crowded markets. Many people live their lives within these smaller spaces, producing the tools, containers and goods that keep daily life functioning. A curious historical footnote reveals that archaeologists have discovered pottery fragments across nearly every layer of Jerusalem's ancient soil. Broken bowls, jars and lamps accumulate over centuries, forming one of the most reliable clues for reconstructing the city's timeline. By studying the shapes and materials of pottery shards, researchers can estimate the approximate age of different archaeological layers. Even a small fragment can reveal when a particular neighbourhood flourished. You reach a tiny open courtyard where sunlight finally fills the space. Several chickens scratch at the ground near a pile of straw. A wooden ladder leans against a wall leading to the roof above. Nearby, a child sits quietly drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. The stillness here feels almost peaceful compared with the festival crowds gathering elsewhere in the city. Scholars sometimes remark that cities like Jerusalem functioned as layered environments. Monumental architecture, busy markets, quiet homes and hidden passages all existed simultaneously within the same urban space. Visitors arriving for religious pilgrimage might remember the grandeur of the temple above all else. Yet the everyday life of the city unfolded largely in places like this. Small courtyards, narrow alley. Follows. Workshops humming quietly behind simple doorways. You lean briefly against the stone wall at the edge of the courtyard. The rock feels cool beneath your hand, despite the warmth of the afternoon. A faint breeze slips through the passageways, carrying distant echoes of festival songs rising from the Temple Mount. Even here, the sacred centre of Jerusalem remains within earshot. The city's hidden corners are never entirely separate from its larger story. They are threads woven quietly into the vast tapestry of Jerusalem's life, and every thread matters. As the days pass in Jerusalem, the life of the city continues in its familiar patterns. Pilgrims move through the temple courts, merchants open their stalls at dawn. Families gather around evening meals beneath the glow of small oil lamps. From the outside, the rhythms appear steady and enduring. Yet beneath this ordinary flow, something quieter stirs. You begin to notice it in small details. Along the streets, near the markets, conversations sometimes pause when Roman soldiers pass. Voices lower slightly and people glance toward one another before continuing their discussions. The soldiers themselves walk calmly, their armour polished, their expressions unreadable. For now, nothing openly disrupts the peace, but tension exists. Jerusalem during this period stands at a crossroads of faith, politics and identity. The temple remains the spiritual centre of Jewish life, drawing pilgrims from across the Roman world. At the same time, the region is governed by Roman authority through provincial administrators and local rulers. These overlapping powers create a delicate balance. Historical records preserved by Roman and Jewish historians confirm that Judea experienced periods of both cooperation and unrest during the 1st century. Some communities accepted Roman rule as a practical reality within a vast empire. Others viewed the foreign presence with deep resentment. Modern historians studying the period frequently refer to the city as a place where religious devotion and political anxiety lived side by side. Archaeological evidence also hints at this complex atmosphere. Excavations around Jerusalem have uncovered Roman military equipment, administrative seals and coins bearing imperial symbols. These objects remind us how deeply the structures of empire extended into daily life. At the same time, the city's architecture and religious spaces continued to express centuries of Jewish tradition. Scholars affiliated with institutions such as Oxford and Stanford have examined these layers carefully. Their research suggests that Jerusalem functioned as both a provincial city of the Roman Empire and a deeply independent cultural centre shaped by its own religious identity. Balancing those two realities was never simple. You walk once again through one of the streets overlooking the Temple Mount. Pilgrims continue their prayers. Priests carry out rituals within the sanctuary. Children chase one another through the lower courtyards. At first glance, nothing appears unusual, yet occasionally small gatherings form in quiet corners. Men speak together in low voices before dispersing again into the crowd. A few travellers from distant regions seem especially attentive to the presence of Roman patrols near the Antonia fortress. Historians still debate the full range of political ideas circulating within Jerusalem during this era. Some groups advocated peaceful coexistence with Roman rule. Others believed that divine intervention would eventually restore complete independence. A few voices, according to certain ancient sources, encouraged more direct resistance against imperial authority. The diversity of opinions reflects the complexity of life in a city where faith and politics intertwine so closely. Oddly enough, several historical writings from the period describe how everyday residents often continued their routine despite the broader tensions around them. Bakers still rose before dawn to prepare bread. Farmers tended their terraces beyond the city walls. Craftsmen shaped wood, clay, and metal inside their small workshops. Life persisted, and in many ways that persistence defined Jerusalem more than the conflicts brewing beneath the surface. You pause beside a small overlook where the city spreads beneath you. The rooftops glow softly in the afternoon light. Smoke drifts upward from cooking fires beginning to prepare the evening meal. The temple walls shine pale against the sky. From this distance, the city appears calm, yet historians examining the decades ahead know that Jerusalem's delicate balance will not last forever. Political pressure, religious expectations, and imperial authority will eventually collide in ways that reshape the city dramatically. At this moment, however, the future remains unseen. People continue their lives unaware of the storms that historians will later describe. A group of children runs past you laughing, their sandals slapping against the stone street. Nearby, an elderly man carefully closes the shutters of his small shop as the day begins to fade. The ordinary scenes of Jerusalem continue unfolding one after another, and perhaps this is what makes the city so remarkable. Even while standing at the centre of enormous historical forces, its people live day by day within the small details of family work and faith. The great events that later generations will remember are still hidden just beyond the horizon. For now, Jerusalem breathes quietly beneath the warm light of the setting sun. The evening returns slowly to Jerusalem. You stand once more along a quiet rise overlooking the city, watching as the last colours of daylight fade across the hills of Judea. The sky shifts from gold to soft violet, and the stone walls of Jerusalem begin to cool after the long warmth of the sun. From here, the city appears peaceful. Rooftops stretch across the ridge like pale steps descending into shadow. Smoke from cooking fires drifts gently upward into the darkening sky. One by one, small oil lamps begin glowing within homes and courtyards. Jerusalem settles again into its nightly rhythm. You can hear distant sounds carried softly on the evening breeze. Somewhere a donkey shifts inside a small enclosure. From another street comes the faint clatter of clay bowls being stacked after supper. Above the rooftops, the temple remains visible. Even in fading light, its walls hold a quiet brightness. The massive platform and sanctuary rise above every surrounding building, reminding you once more how completely the city's life revolves around that sacred centre. Ancient historians writing about Jerusalem often struggled to describe its unique place in the world. It was not the largest city of the Roman Empire, nor the wealthiest, yet it possessed a spiritual gravity that drew people across continents. Pilgrims travelled hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometres simply to stand where you now stand. Modern archaeological research continues to uncover details about this remarkable place. Excavations led by scholars connected with institutions such as Oxford and Stanford have revealed streets, homes, and public structures that confirm much of what ancient writers described. Massive foundation stones supporting the Temple Mount still stand where they were placed 2,000 years ago. Water tunnels carved through bedrock still carry traces of the engineers who shaped them. Fragments of pottery, lamps, and tools continue to emerge from the soil, each piece adding another small chapter to the city's story. Yet even with these discoveries, historians still debate many aspects of Jerusalem's appearance during this era. Some scholars argue that the city was more crowded and bustling than we often imagine. Others suggest that certain neighbourhoods contained quieter spaces, gardens and open courtyards that balanced the density of urban life. Archaeology answers some questions while raising new ones. The past rarely reveals itself all at once. As darkness deepens across the hills, the temple courts grow quieter. The final rituals of the day conclude within the sanctuary, and priests move calmly through the fading light. Below the Temple Mount, the neighbourhoods of Jerusalem glow gently with scattered lamps. Each light represents a small circle of life. Families finishing their meals, children listening to evening stories, neighbours sharing quiet conversations beneath the stars. A curious historical observation made by several researchers notes that despite the city's political tensions and crowded festivals, most days in ancient Jerusalem were defined by ordinary routines. People worked, cooked, prayed and rested much as communities across the ancient world always had. The extraordinary moments recorded in history books were only brief interruptions in a much longer flow of daily life. You take one last look across the city. The stars now appear clearly above the hills, shining faintly over the rooftops and towers. The temple's pale walls catch a hint of moonlight, giving the sanctuary a gentle silver glow. For a moment, everything feels still. Jerusalem rare. Jerusalem rests, and as you stand there, the centuries seem to fold quietly together. The streets you walked earlier continue to exist beneath layers of time. The courtyards, markets, and stairways remain preserved within the earth below modern buildings. Archaeologists slowly uncover them piece by piece, revealing glimpses of the same world you have just explored. A city built from Mausoleum. A city shaped by faith. A city remembered across thousands of years. The breeze moving across the hillside grows cooler now. It carries the faint scent of olive trees from the valleys below and the lingering warmth of cooking fires within the walls. You allow your thoughts to drift gently across the quiet landscape. The long roads that brought pilgrims here, the crowded markets and narrow streets, the towering temple glowing in the sun. All of it now settles into memory, and with the city resting beneath the night sky, the story slowly fades into calm silence. Wind down. Now the night deepens fully over Jerusalem. The lamps that once flickered brightly begin to dim one by one as families retire indoors. Conversations fade into quiet murmurs behind closed doors. Even the animals in their small enclosures grow still. Only the occasional breeze moves through the olive trees outside the walls. You imagine the city breathing slowly in its sleep. The temple courts lie silent beneath the moonlight. Stone steps that carried thousands of pilgrims during the day now rest empty. The enormous walls stand motionless, holding centuries of prayers within their ancient stones. Above them, the stars continue their slow journey across the sky. It's the same sky travellers once followed across deserts and valleys to reach this place. The same constellations that guided caravan shepherds and pilgrims toward the city on the hill. Everything grows softer now. Your mind drifts across the streets you walked earlier. The market stalls filled with spices and olives. The rooftops where families gathered in the evening air. The hidden alleys where craftsmen shaped clay and wood. All of it remains quietly alive within the memory of the city. Jerusalem has always been a place where time gathers. Generations arrive, live their days, and pass on while the stones remain. Each layer of history settles gently upon the last, creating the city we study and remember today. And now, as the quiet night spreads across the hills of Judea, the ancient city rests once more beneath the stars. The wind moves softly, the lamps fade, and Jerusalem sleeps. Sweet dreams.